Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Crypto Byte. Today is Friday, April 29th. Congrats on making it through another wild week in these markets. Just last night, we were up above 40K very briefly. Now today, back down, testing 39K. Alts down across the board, but some interesting price action in the traditional equity markets. Lots being driven by earnings, so plenty to talk about today. But before we get started, CJ, how are you doing today, my friend?
Doing well, Monty. Excited to take a look at some indicators on Bitcoin, namely the OBV, on balance volume. Haven't talked about that for quite a while. Also, some interesting news in Phantom that I'm excited to get to, as well as Nexo. That one's up big today, about 18 to 20%. So should be interesting to dive into that news and much more. But how are you, my friend?
Yeah, doing well, doing well. Glad it's Friday. It's going to be interesting to see how Bitcoin trades this week without the traditional equity markets kind of influencing its price action because we kind of been, hovering around this 40K level, but seeing some really interesting price action this morning and a little bit of a divergence between what we've been, expecting between the DXY and the price action of altcoins and a lot of other interesting things. So excited to talk about that and a lot more in today's episode. But would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I'll start with a couple of news pieces before we get into some charts. The first I want to share is a new tokenomics implementation by Phantom that has occurred recently to burn FTM. Like Ethereum Proposal 1559, where you have a portion of the fees that are burned forever, Phantom has now implemented this earlier in the week, and now we have officially about 4 million Phantom burned. In terms of dollars and the actual coins. So definitely something to watch. You can watch the burn live at this site right up here. But very interesting. Um, you know, that project definitely needs something to get the morale a little bit better. Just after the whole Andre leaving and the termination of certain projects on Phantom, even though they weren't being technically terminated. So either way, you want to see favorable supply and demand dynamics. Obviously, not enough to keep that coin over the $1 mark, but either way, for the long term, that's the type of things I think you want to see in a lot of these proof of stake networks that are involved with a lot of transactions and just ultimately having something to burn and implement scarcity. So figured we start off with that in terms of FTM.
Good stuff there, CJ. Yeah, always important news when you get a shift in the tokenomics of an asset like that. I mean, we've seen how important that's been for ETH, so it'll be interesting to see what that does for Phantom as it's kind of, making new lows here following the beat up it's taken over the last couple of weeks to months here. But beyond that, how about we take a look at the Bitcoin chart here because, actually, what I have pulled up here is the Apple chart. First and foremost, CJ, we started this week talking about how we had a lot of earnings reports coming out this week, and it turns out that those weren't the only things driving this market. We also had talks about supply chain concerns going forward and what that may do to price. But ultimately, as you can see, Apple beat earnings a very solid 6.7% beat. They also exceeded revenue quite shockingly to the tune of 3.24 billion. And as a result, are seeing some really nice price action here today. Still, though, CJ, one thing that is worth noting, and I think is a part of the reason why we're not seeing too much favorable price action in a lot of these altcoins today is what we're seeing, in the queues. Still looking tentative here down at these lows. And I think until we start to really bounce from these levels and kind of remove that fear of a further breakdown in the queues and, more importantly, a further breakdown in the NASDAQ, which still is a fear that is looming large in the minds of a lot of speculative investors, I think capital is still remaining on the sidelines. So, that's what we're seeing in traditional equity markets. But I think, tying that in with what you're seeing in Bitcoin and what you're seeing with that, on exchange volume and whatnot could be a pretty interesting indication about where the retail capital is currently parked. So that's what we're seeing in, traditional equity markets, lots of important earnings. But what are we seeing in Bitcoin here today?
One moment. Yeah, so a little chart that I wanted to go over here from Income Sharks over on Twitter had to do with on balance volume, or specifically OBV. And we've talked about that a little bit historically and how it's lined up in terms of trends and when you see money or capital just flowing into the space very generally. So typically, it's interesting that we've seen like drop offs, and once we've broken these trend lines in terms of the OEV, it's signaled a indication that trend's probably cooling off up here. I think this is a really great indication back in the day. Once we broke the trend line just shortly after reaching 67K, that was a pretty good time to sell and take a lot of profit in hindsight. And the OBV SMA 5 would have given you a pretty good indication to do that as we kind of broke down from that level. Now it's kind of interesting because we're starting to see a little bit of the inverse. We're starting to see a new trend form. But then again, this one needs to have the strength to be able to really move higher. And, as long as we don't get that in the Qs, I'm not exactly sure we're going to get it in Bitcoin either, especially with the increase in correlation between the two. Another interesting chart that I wanted to just briefly mention that is coming up later on in the year has to do with average market returns during a presidential term, or ultimately how markets underperform in the lead up to midterms and then outperform after the election. So midterms will be November this year. And typically what we've seen historically is kind of a decline leading up to those, and then kind of starting to increase further. So just something to watch out there, but figured that was something interesting. I know Tom Lee has really talked a lot about just like midterms and their overall effect on markets and how they've acted. And then the final thing I will say before passing it back, Monty, is just some of the recent price action in Nexo. I think we're up about 18 to 19% today. So congrats to the holders there. But overall, that was off the news that a debit card is ultimately going to be launching. And there's some interesting features for that as well. So congrats to Nexo for getting that out and getting the token to pump a little bit. But yeah.
Yeah, CJ. One thing that a lot of people are talking about this week, and for good reason, is just the fact that Bitcoin has just seen a general lack of volatility, which is unprecedented given the sort of expectations people have, especially new traders have when entering this space. But looking at the Bollinger Bands here, we're seeing a pretty unprecedented volatility squeeze here. We haven't really seen this sort of tightening range in the Bollinger Bands essentially since we did get that short squeeze all the way back in July of 2021. This was the last time the market was, this spectacularly unvolatile. So that's something that is definitely worth noting. Still, we're seeing sustained buy step coming in as we go below 39K. But, as we saw last night, continued sell pressure above that critical 40K level. So that is, we're setting up a very, very tight range here. I think that is clear from what we're seeing from the Bollinger Bands, but also from just the orders that we're seeing stack up at right above 40K and then right below 39K. We're establishing this very, very tight range here. So, that will only last for so long. It'll be interesting to see what catalyst kind of drives us out of that, compressed Bollinger Bands and brings back some volatility to this market. Because for the time being, it is very, very unvolatile and dare I say, slightly boring this week. But that may change, so keep an eye on the funding rates. That's what we've been watching a lot. But beyond that, I think until Bitcoin really kind of breaks out of that volatility channel and starts to, show some more signs of positive price action, these alts are just going to kind of remain in a rut that they're in right now. So tough to trade this market, but the volatility will be back. So just prepare yourself for it.
Yeah, there are other opportunities too. Even like outside of crypto, but like, man, if you could have just put the 39, like 42 butterfly on these past couple weeks, I mean, just such a range, such chop, that would have been a nice trade. But regardless, looking forward to discussing some more of our trade insights and trade setups. Had some on waves and GMT recently this week, so looking forward to updating that in the Doge of the Day members only analysis after this. So if you'd like to join us for that, please check the link in the description below. And Monty, any final words here, sir, on this nice Friday morning?
No, I think that's all we got for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps out a lot. But have a great weekend. We will see you guys again on Monday. Happy trading, and yeah, have a great one.